I was reviewing a municipal water compliance audit when my phone buzzed with a calendar invite titled Quick Sync, HR and Operations. Sent at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon. Nobody schedules a quick sync on a Friday at 4:47 because they want to give you good news. I'd been with the Regional Water Authority for 23 years. Started as a field technician right out of college, crawled through every certification program the province offered, and eventually became the Senior Systems Compliance Officer for the entire Western District. My job was to make sure that every treatment facility, every pumping station, every monitoring protocol we ran was fully certified under both provincial and federal guidelines. Environment and Climate Change Canada doesn't mess around, and neither did I. I had 12 operational licenses in my name. 12, the kind that take years of supervised practice and multiple government examinations to acquire. My supervisor at the time, a quiet, methodical man who'd been in the industry almost as long as I had, used to joke that I was basically a walking regulatory department. That wasn't entirely wrong. The new director of operations arrived in January. I'll call him my new director because that's all he ever really was to me, a title I had to answer to, not a person I ever got to know. He was 34 years old, came from a tech startup in Waterloo that had built some kind of AI-based infrastructure monitoring platform, and he walked into our offices like he was doing us a favor by showing up. Within a week, he'd reorganized the department's internal reporting structure. Within a month, he'd hired 3 digital integration specialists from his old network. By March, he was sitting across from me in a glass-walled boardroom calling my entire role operationally redundant in a modernized compliance environment. I remember looking at him across the table and thinking, he genuinely has no idea what he's looking at. I didn't say that. I nodded, took notes, asked questions about what the transition timeline would look like. I'm 51 years old. I've sat in enough of those rooms to know that arguing in the moment never helps you. What helps you is understanding exactly what's happening before it happens to you. What was happening was this. My new director had convinced the executive team that a combination of automated monitoring software and contracted compliance consultants could replace my position entirely. He'd put together a presentation with graphs and projected savings, and I'd been told about it secondhand by a colleague who sat in on the budget meeting. The phrase he'd apparently used was legacy overhead. Legacy overhead. 23 years of keeping a regional water system legally operational, and that was the phrase someone used to describe me. I started doing some quiet research of my own. The first thing I looked into was the nature of my licenses. I knew the answer, but I needed to see it in writing clearly in a way that would be useful to me later. I pulled up every license certificate I held and read each one carefully. Every single license was issued to me personally, not to the Regional Water Authority. Not to my department, to me by name, tied to my individual professional history and examination records. In Canada, operational licenses for water treatment and distribution systems are held by qualified persons, specific, named individuals who have met the certification requirements set out by the relevant provincial and federal bodies. You can't just hand them over. You can't transfer them to a software platform. You can't assign them to a department. If I left, they left with me. I'd made a note of that and kept it to myself. The second thing I researched was my employment contract. I'd signed it in 2008 when I moved into the compliance role, and there was a clause in there, one I'd long since forgotten about, that had been inserted at my own request back when I was negotiating. It stated that in the event of termination without cause, the organization would have a 60-day transition period during which I would provide documentation transfer support. But if terminated with cause, or if I chose to resign, no such obligation existed. I made a note of that too. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. Not my wife, not yet. Not my old supervisor who'd retired 2 years earlier. I just kept showing up, kept doing my job, kept filing compliance reports and renewing monitoring logs and attending the weekly operations calls where my new director talked about digital transformation like it was something that had been ordained. In April, he asked me to document all my institutional knowledge into a shared internal wiki. He called it a knowledge transfer initiative. I started writing, I documented the systems, I documented the processes, I wrote down everything that could be written down, everything that was procedural and learnable. What I did not document was anything that required a license to act on. Because here's what nobody had bothered to check. The water safety plan for our district required a certified operator, a named, licensed individual to sign off on every quarterly compliance submission to the provincial regulator. The electronic monitoring system my new director was implementing could collect data. It could flag anomalies. It could generate reports. It could not sign anything. And nothing went to the regulator without a signature from a qualified person holding an active provincial operator license, minimum Class OIV. I held Class OIV and Class V. The 3 digital integration specialists my new director had hired held exactly 0. I also quietly confirmed, through a conversation with someone I knew at the provincial office, that our next major compliance submission was due in early June. Environment and Climate Change Canada had a routine inspection scheduled for the same month. I continued going to work. I continued doing my job. I said nothing. In the second week of May, I was called into my new director's office and handed a letter. It said the Regional Water Authority was eliminating my position effective May 31st. It cited operational restructuring. It was not termination with cause. It was a layoff, which under provincial employment standards came with a severance package. 1 week per year of service up to a maximum under the ESA, plus whatever additional was owed under my contract. He shook my hand. He said something about the industry evolving. I thanked him for his time, took the letter, and went back to my desk. I called my wife on the way to my car. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "What are you going to do?" I told her I was going to clean out my desk, collect my severance, and let the summer play out. She knows me well enough to know that when I say something like that, I mean something more than it sounds. I spent the last 2 weeks of May completing everything I was responsible for. Every log, every report, every pending submission that fell within my notice period. On my last day, I packed a cardboard box, said goodbye to the colleagues I'd genuinely liked, and walked out to the parking lot in the late afternoon sun. I had already, through my provincial licensing body, notified them that I would be changing my employer affiliation effective June 1st. This is standard procedure when a licensed operator changes positions. It's administrative, it's routine. It means that my licenses, which had been associated with the Regional Water Authority as my sponsoring employer, were now listed as independently held, pending a new employer affiliation. The authority had 48 hours to designate an alternative licensed operator for their compliance documentation. They had no one. I found this out not from any inside source, but because on June 6th my phone rang and it was my new director. He did not say hello. He said, "We have a situation." I said, "What kind of situation?" He said the provincial regulator was requesting the Q2 compliance submission and needed a signed certification from a Class O or higher licensed operator. He said the submission was due in 4 days. He said the inspection from the federal office was scheduled for June 19th. I said, "I see." He said he understood that my departure had created some gaps and that he wanted to know if I'd be willing to come back on a short-term to consulting basis to help bridge the transition. I asked him to send me a formal request by email. I hung up and I called my wife. She was quiet again, and then she laughed. Not a mean laugh, just the kind of laugh that happens when something goes exactly the way you thought it might. The email arrived within the hour. It was professional and measured and asked if I would be available for temporary compliance support at my standard daily rate. My standard daily rate had been roughly $510 based on my annual salary divided by working days. I replied that I was available for consulting work and that my consulting rate was $1,800 per day with a minimum 3-week engagement, payable in advance, plus reimbursement for any travel or materials costs. I noted that I was also in discussions with 2 other municipalities regarding ongoing compliance support and that my availability window was limited. The response took 6 hours. They agreed. What happened over the following 3 weeks was something I tried very hard not to be smug about. Not because I felt bad for the organization. I didn't, not exactly. But because there were people there, good people who had nothing to do with any of this, who were genuinely stressed. The operations team, the water treatment plant staff, the field technicians I'd worked alongside for 2 days, none of them had made the decision to call me legacy overhead. They were just trying to keep a water system running. I did my job. I signed the compliance submission. I walked through the federal inspection with the team and answered every question the inspector had. I reviewed the automated monitoring system's output reports and caught 3 data logging errors in the first week that the system had flagged as resolved but hadn't been. The inspector made a note of those errors in his report. After the inspection, the lead inspector, a woman I'd met at a conference years earlier, pulled me aside and asked how long I'd been with the authority. I told her I'd just concluded my employment there and was now independent. She nodded slowly and said, "That explains the knowledge gap." It wasn't said to be cruel, it was just an observation. My new director sat through all of it. I watched him, across the boardroom table during the exit debrief, slowly understanding something that no software presentation had prepared him for. That expertise in a regulated industry isn't a line item. It's not a position you eliminate and replace with a platform. It's a person specifically who has passed specific examinations, maintained specific certifications, carried specific legal authority. And when that person walks out the door, the authority goes with them. He didn't apologize, I didn't expect him to. But at the end of the 3rd week, he asked if I would be willing to extend the consulting engagement for another 2 months while they worked to find and onboard a permanently certified operator. I told him I would need to restructure the agreement. New rate, new terms. I also told him, as a professional courtesy, that sourcing a Class OI or Class V certified operator in this region typically took 4 to 6 months, and that if the authority wanted to remain in good standing with the regulator, they should start that process immediately and maintain my involvement in the interim. He thanked me. He genuinely meant it. That part was a little strange, honestly. The thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of it is that there was no grand moment of confrontation. No speech in a boardroom, no satisfying scene where I got to lay everything out and watch someone's face fall. It was just a slow, quiet series of events that unfolded the way they were always going to unfold, once someone decided that a 23-year compliance officer with 12 federal and provincial licenses was legacy overhead. The knowledge doesn't go away when the person does. But the legal authority does. That's the part nobody had thought about. By September, I had 3 municipalities on retainer. I work from home 2 days a week. I set my own hours. My wife and I took 2 weeks in Nova Scotia in August, something we'd been putting off for years because I could never get the vacation timing right. The authority eventually hired a new permanent operator. She's qualified, experienced, and I genuinely hope they'd treat her better than they treated me. She called me once, about 4 months in, to ask a question about a legacy monitoring protocol I'd set up years earlier. Spent 45 minutes on the phone with her, answered everything thoroughly, and didn't charge anyone a cent for it. That's not something I did for my new director, or for the executive team, or for the organization's bottom line. I did it because she was doing the same work I'd done for over 2 decades, and she deserved to have the right information. My truck is a 2022 Ram 1500 in granite crystal metallite. I bought it in October, the month after my consulting income cleared what my old salary had been. Paid for a significant portion of it in cash. I drive it home every evening to a house I've owned for 16 years in a town I chose because the winters are manageable and the lake is close and the people, for the most part, leave you alone to live your life. I don't think about my new director very much anymore. I think about the work. I think about the systems, the submissions, the inspection schedules for the spring. I think about what it took to build the expertise I have, and about the fact that no one can take that from me, no matter what they put in a letter. Some things, when you've spent long enough building them, belong to you in ways that no termination clause can touch.